A Pet for Calvin by Barbara Robinson. Calvin McCandless thought he might be the only fourth grade kid in Homer Applegate Elementary School who didn't have a pet. But he wasn't sure about that. Some of those kids were girls, and they didn't talk to him about pets. Or anything else. His best friend, Roger Stratton, had 2 pets, a dog and a hamster. "I don't have 2 pets," Roger always said when the subject came up. "I have a dog. My sister has the hamster. I don't even like the hamster." "But you have 2 pets in your house," Calvin insisted. He knew that his friends sometimes got tired of hearing him complain this way, but he couldn't help it. Probably kids who had pets, dogs, cats, gerbils. A kid in the 5th grade had a ferret. Kids who had them were so used to having them that they didn't even think about it. "You don't even think about it," he told Joe Coolidge. "You've got your dog. He's always there." "I do too think about it," Joe said. "I have to think about it. I have to feed him and walk him because in our dumb neighborhood, he can't just run free. Tell you what, Calvin, you can walk my dog if you want to. That would be outside. Do you still get wheezy from animals outside?" Calvin sighed. "In or out," he said. "It doesn't matter." He spoke from experience because his parents did once let him bring a dog home, but before they were even in the house, his eyes had closed up and he couldn't breathe. "Outstanding," his grandmother said when she heard about this. "Were they trying to kill you? Death by dog?" As always, his kooky grandmother made Calvin laugh and feel better. But, as always, she made his father sigh and roll his eyes. "Mother," Mr. McCandless said, "don't say things like that. We thought maybe, with the new medicine, Calvin could tolerate—" "A short-haired dog," Calvin's mother put in. "It was a short-haired dog." "Not short enough," his grandmother said. But then she hugged everybody to show that she wasn't really mad at them, that she was just sad for Calvin. There was a possibility that Calvin would outgrow his wheeziness, but that would be a long time to wait. Besides, would he still need a pet when he was a grown-up? His father didn't seem to need one, although maybe he would if it weren't for Calvin's allergy. "Not at all," his father said. "I have you and your baby sister and your mother. I have my job and our home and things to do. Like today, I have to go to Home Depot, and I have to watch the ball game, and I have to spade up the vegetable patch. Want to come along?" Of course he did want to. This is what they did every Saturday. Home Depot, ball game, some house chore. The Home Depot was always fun, and then the Red Sox won, and now he could dig up dirt and get chore points for it. It was great dirt, too, loose and loamy, and he liked to pick up a shovelful and run it through his fingers. He made a small cone of the dirt, and with a stick, he made a careful hole in the middle, like a model of Mount Vesuvius, and up through the hole came not hot lava, but a worm. It stood up, which Calvin had never seen a worm do, but of course this one was in a hole, which helped, and it looked at him. He was so sure of this that after a second or two he said, "Hello," even though he knew the worm couldn't hear him. He knew from science class that worms didn't have ears. Worms didn't have much of anything, really, except what the science teacher called sensory receptors. "Like goose flesh," the teacher had said, "when you're chilly or scared." Or Calvin thought like the funny, thrilly feeling in the soles of your feet when you step barefoot onto sand and gravel. Worms, he assumed, must be all feeling, and he reached out to touch this worm. His fingers were inky from keeping score in the ball game, and he left a black mark on the worm, which wriggled back into the hole. "Calvin," his mother called, "it's almost dinner time. You need to come in and wash up." To his amazement, the worm wriggled back out and looked at him again. He picked it all up. Mound of dirt, worm, extra dirt, pieces of grass and leaves and twigs that were lying around, and carried it to where his father had been planting squash seeds saved from last year in a plastic container. The plastic container made a perfect worm house, he thought. and added some more grass and twigs, and later a cover of plastic wrap with air holes, of course. Last of all, he wrote Spot on a piece of tablet paper and taped it to the container. It was the perfect name for his worm, he thought, looking at his own inky finger. He didn't mention the worm to anyone, but he didn't deliberately not mention the worm either. The subject didn't come up, and the only family member who would be interested was his baby sister, and she would just want to eat it. That night, he put the worm house on the shelf above his bed with his important things, his baseball cards and signed program, his Morphagon transformer, his Coke bottle that fell from the third floor of the school and didn't break, and before he went to sleep, he took the plastic wrap off and very gently poked around in the dirt till he found the worm curled up. He stirred the dirt a little more, and the worm curled up a little more and went back to sleep. He checked up on his worm off and on the next day, but there wasn't much he could do for it. It didn't need water or food, but it did need dirt. Tomorrow, after school, he would take care of his worm's dirt. At first, he thought he would just add dirt, but maybe this was like kitty litter that had to be changed, according to his friend John Hazeltine, who had 2 cats. "Gotta change the kitty litter," John would say, and he would go change the kitty litter while Calvin and Roger or Joe would hang around and wait for him to come out and ride bikes. Of course, John could just throw out the old kitty litter, but Calvin had to empty the dirt into his mother's big mixing bowl, then transfer his worm into new dirt in the worm house. He probably likes it in the bowl, Calvin thought, because there's lots more room. Maybe he thinks it's vacation. He scooped up a handful of dirt and worm and put it all back in the plastic container on nice new dirt. He thought he could tell, that his worm liked it because he wriggled right down in, and when Calvin looked in the side of the container, his worm looked back. One Friday, his mother cleaned his room, and she asked him about the container of dirt. "I guess you're growing something in there? Seeds? Lima beans?" "No," he said. "It's my worm. He's in there." "Oh, Calvin," his mother said. "A worm? You'll just knock that thing down and spill dirt all over your bed." "Pretty close quarters for a worm," his father said. "It's used to a little more territory." Calvin suddenly remembered thinking almost that very same thing when he had changed the worm dirt. He had even thought it might seem like a vacation, but a big mixing bowl wasn't much of a vacation when you're used to the whole backyard. "Of course," his mother said. "I know worms don't have any feelings." Wrong, Calvin thought. They're all feelings with their sensory receptors. A worm could probably feel comfortable or uncomfortable, maybe even scared or nervous. After supper, he took his mother's garden trowel and scratched out a big path of soft, sifty dirt in the backyard, and sure enough, Spot wriggled right down into it. Comfortable, Calvin thought. In another week or two, he would have changed the dirt 6 or 7 times. He and his worm would have looked at each other through the side of the worm house. He might even have taken him for a very short walk. He would have taken him to school on Bring Your Pet Day. Now none of those things would happen, and it didn't help to think about them. The next day was Saturday, and there was Home Depot, but then his parents went to an all-day barbecue, and his grandmother came to stay with him. "Calvin," she said after lunch, "tell me your life story since last week, all the good stuff." So he told his grandmother about his worm. "Outstanding," she said. "A perfect pet. Your father was right, though. A worm needs a lot of room. We'll get that great big lasagna dish, the glass one. Where's the worm?" "Well, I dumped the dirt, Grandma, so, worm too then. Back in the garden?" She didn't wait for him to answer. "Come on, let's see." Kooky, he thought as his grandmother fished up a worm and said, "Oh, this is an old one," and dropped it back in the dirt. "Was your worm very fat?" she asked. "Some worms are." "I don't know, Grandma, just an average worm." "Best kind," she said. Right then, Calvin decided to announce that any worm his grandmother produced was his worm. "That's it," he was going to say. "You found my worm," because it would make her happy, and it wouldn't make any difference to him. She discarded several worms, too thin, too lazy, and then she crowed, "Here we are. If this one could talk, it would say, 'I'm Calvin's worm.'" "Yes," and she handed him Spot. All Calvin's sensory receptors shivered and tingled. "Yes," he said, his voice a little shaky. I would know him anywhere. And of course he would, because of the black mark Calvin, had put there on this very worm. "There must be hundreds of worms in this garden," his father had once said. "Too bad I'm not a fisherman with all these worms." And out of all these worms, his grandmother had found his worm. Or maybe his worm had found his grandmother, because he had heard her say, "That's some outstanding worm. Stood right up in the dirt." Now Spot had curled up in the palm of his hand, so Calvin had to use his other hand to scoop dirt into the lasagna dish. "This is just for now," he told Spot, because maybe his science teacher was right about worms and ears, but even so, it didn't seem right to have a pet and never talk to it. "But next Saturday at Home Depot, we'll get a really big plastic box to be your house, and a lot of new dirt, and one of those toy ladders that you see in hamster cages." By next week, he would have changed the dirt at least twice. "Gotta change the worm dirt," he would say. He and Spot would have looked at each other each morning and night through the side of the worm house. He would have taken Spot on a walk, just like now, on the palm of his hand. And this year, on Bring Your Pet Day, he would be the only fourth grade kid in Homer Applegate Elementary School, maybe the only kid anywhere, who had a worm for a pet.